In all of the equal but separate, quote unquote, laws and regulations, that people of a certain race were not fitting to be in certain public office simply by virtue of their race. Now we bring it to gender. Here's where I think that as women or as those who agitate for equality need to get off the bus. This is not an argument for we are as good as men. This is an argument for we are human beings, and that is the only criteria by which we deserve to be in Parliament. And where we have had historical and institutional positions that have devalued the opportunities for one set of human beings and increased that for another, that has to be addressed through affirmative action. It's the way it has always been addressed successfully. This isn't anything new.
All right. What are your thoughts? Remember, at AM Live KE is our Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is at Olive Burrows, or you can also tweet us on at NTV Kenya. Renee, what's your Twitter handle?
At Renee Ngabao.
Okay. Trifosa not on Twitter?
Not now.
Okay. Dorcas? No. Okay. But tweet us. We will share your thoughts with the ladies on the panel. Now, the back page of the Daily Nation tells us the AG tells off Amina, that is Education CS, Amina Mohammed, over new TTC entry grades. The CS had said the entry grade should be reduced or come down from a C+ to a C-. And the AG says that is the purview of the TSC, and she has therefore stepped over her bounds. That is the story on the back page of the Daily Nation. But on to another department, or rather another unit of government that seems to be having a bit of trouble, and that is the police service. Of course, that is according to the Star and the Standard newspapers this morning. On the front page of the Standard, the headline is "Failed Arrest Fuels Kinoti EACC War." Failed arrest fuels Kinoti EACC war. And under that it says sibling rivalry. The recent case where police helped 2 DCI officers arrested by the anti-graft agency in a sting operation escape points to a silent tough war involving the 2 state investigative agencies. And that particular story is on page 6 of the Standard. Before we get to what the top story on the Star is, Trifosa, I'll start with you. I don't know whether you've read up or listened to this or watched this story where there were 2 DCI officers arrested in a sting, and they escaped, according to the news reports, after they were aided by their colleagues. So what went through your mind when you read that particular story?
First of all, I think for me, the thing goes back to, I think there's a breakdown of our moral fabric. We do not respect the very institutions that we have put in place to govern us. And this lack of respect, I think, is just a reflection again of who we are. I mean, we will, if you think about just the all institutions, even the Ambera boys for me, it's a lack of respect for those institutions. And once we have institutions that are meant to govern us and we lack respect for them, then they will not have the authority to do what they need to do. And so for me, it was a big shame, and I felt very sad, because if this can happen at that level, what about the others? And so, I almost feel like what the poem in Things Fall Apart, the center cannot hold, because things are literally falling apart.
Okay. Dorcas?
What is an institution without governance? These are the very restraining systems or arms that keep human beings at peace with each other. And like, of course, Trofena says...
Trifosa?
Trifosa.
Yes.
Sorry. We put these institutions in place ourselves, just like we are the same people who put leaders into leadership. So when we decide not to actually go along and hold them in high esteem, and probably just go along with the rules and the laws that have been put in place to govern us, what are we saying to ourselves as human beings? Then at some point, then, it seems like we cease to be human beings and rather begin to behave like animals. because animals have no restraint. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Renee? So what were your thoughts when you, I mean, did you laugh? Did you find it amusing when you read the story where the DCI office, these guys had been handcuffed and then they take off with the assistance of their colleagues, and these are meant to be the law enforcers, yet they have no respect for the law.
You couldn't make this stuff up, could you?
No, I think sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
This all we need now is
Yeah.
a movie director. I can even see the guy who's going to be playing. You know, we just need to assign like a couple of well-known American actors with a really bad African accent, and we're
Yes.
off to the fields. We don't even need to change anything. The script has already been written. Here's the thing. If at this level they can spring each other out of jail, what's going to stop those young men from Madare and from Dandora pulling guns on cops? If the cops are pulling guns out on the EACC, what's going to stop someone under investigation by the EACC is putting together his own little gang and coming and springing whoever he needs to? Why don't we pull a Narcos while we're at it? Why don't we go the whole hog and just have, you know, private helicopters, private armies? Are we clear on what has happened here? This isn't just a disrespect of institutions, although I agree with you that there is that. This is the first sign of anarchy in this nation. When institutions can turn in on other institutions. Watch when African or indeed other countries have come apart. Where has it begun? It has begun when men and women, mostly men I must say, who are armed by the state, turn in on each other and on citizens. This, more than anything, should wake up the house on the hill, should draw in every single disciplinary institution, committee, and mechanism to pull this back in the public eye. Don't do it undercover where nobody can see it. Make it clear that there is never going to be a situation where one institution can come, or members of one institution can come and spring out those of another. And don't just go for the people at the bottom, or the ones who drew the gun on the day. No, do what IPOA did when, in the case of the 12-year-old Kwekwe, work backwards right to the station, work beyond the station right to Vigilante House or wherever these orders come from, and start from the top and tear that whole behavior out. Because if we don't, who's going to stop anyone else from justifying being able to spring out their guy from wherever they want to?
All right. Vigilance House.
Vigilante House.
Well, and according to the Star, apparently it doesn't end there. Kinoti Boynet clash over reforms. That is the headline story on today's Star newspaper. Kinoti Boynet clash over reforms. But I don't want us to comment on that. What I'd like us to comment on is a very interesting story. Let me just find it real quick. On page 6 of the Star. And it says, Speaker forced out of office as room sprayed with choking chemical. Speaker forced out of office as room sprayed with choking chemical. And that is reinstated Homa Bay Speaker Elizabeth Ayo, who was forced out of her office by that particular chemical that was sprayed in her office. And all her furniture, she found that all her furniture had been carried out, and she was forced to buy or bring in plastic chairs and a table. So I think that goes towards the conduct of our county assemblies. Of course, it brings to mind what happened with Nairobi Speaker Beatrice Elachi. In her case, she's the one who sprayed the toxic chemical that was criminal to defend herself as the situation sort of unraveled when MCA stormed her office to force her out of office. In this particular case, the Homa Bay Speaker was reinstated by the courts. The MCA is still not happy with that decision, sprayed her office with a chemical to keep her out, took out her furniture. I mean, I don't know, the county assemblies, despite what the courts say, tend to have a mind of their own. They're like, it was the same thing with Elachi. She was, the court suspended the impeachment. She came back to office and they were not satisfied. They're like, no, she has to leave by all means. I remember there was a police officer who was saying he was roughed up by the MCAs himself as well. I mean, what does it say of our society? I'll start with you, Dorcas, that the MCAs in particular don't seem to have respect for court orders.
She was reinstated by the court.
Yes.
That's where justice happens. I'm even so surprised because this is a lady and the other case was also about a lady. So I'm wondering, is it something about them not wanting women in office? When I look at it from the other side of the coin, and I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, if she was reinstated by the court and the court cleared her issues and her case, why would this MCS think otherwise? What are we saying? This is an institution that is closer to the people. We have moved away from the central government. We have gone into counties, closer to where people are. What are we saying to the people? What are we saying to the citizens of this nation? That we cannot govern ourselves. Why? What messages are we passing even to our homes? What is this about these MCAs not seeing that this is an order from where justice sits? It kills me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Truforsa, do you think we need to make it harder to impeach a speaker?
I don't think it's making it harder. I think it's just respect. Because really, once the court passes it, it needs to be carried out. It needs to be implemented. But it seems to me that we do not have respect, again, for me, against the same thing. We do not have respect for the very same structures and institutions that we ourselves have put in place to govern us and put us in order. And it just seems, you know, it's almost like we've become mindless animals almost, that anything goes and it doesn't really matter what the court says. We will do as we please, and therefore there is mere anarchy. You know, going back to what Renee was saying, and again, borrowing it from Chinua Achebe, mere anarchy is loosed upon the earth. So that, it's because we have lost that very, not just respect, but yeah, it's a sense of respect. We've lost respect and dignity for ourselves, because then the way we display it shows that we do not respect ourselves. Those institutions are about our dignity. They're about ourselves as a people. They're about ourselves as a nation. But when we do not respect those very institutions, we have lost respect for ourselves and for our dignity as a people. So I don't think it's making it harder. I think it is instilling in us a sense of respect and dignity.
Okay. Renee, when we come back, I'd like to hear from you what you think we should do at this point, because we've discussed a lot of issues to do with a lack of respect for the institutions, from the police now at the county assembly level with regard to the judiciary. So when we come back, we're taking a short break, but when we come back, I'd like you to address what the remedy could be. Good morning. You're watching AM Live. If you've just joined us, my name is Olive Burrows, and I have an all-female panel this morning. I think it's a good thing. Yeah? Yes. Get more women getting their voices heard. Next to me is Renee Ngamau, who is the chairperson of Amnesty Kenya. Thank you very much for being here. As I said, we've had a very interesting conversation so far on the stories in the dailies. Next to her is Trufosa Kwaka, who is the principal St. Paul's University, Nairobi campus, as well as non-executive member of the International Leadership Foundation, Kenya.
And Longhorn Publishers.
And Longhorn Publishers.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And next to her is Dorcas Mwamba, who is completing her PhD in leadership and who is also a faculty member at Daystar University. Ladies, again, thank you very much for being here. Already your contributions have been very interesting. Share yours. The hashtag is AM Live. The handle is at AM Live KE, at Nation Kenya, or at O Burrows. Two of the ladies on the panel are not on Twitter, but Renee is at Renee Ngamau. Yes, I got it right?
That's right.
Okay. All right. So, Renee, before we went on the break, we're discussing what's been happening at the county assemblies, this apparent disregard for court orders. And I was asking, what solutions then do we have?
Let me mention just this before I give three proposals in terms of solutions. We know that we are a country that has had terrorist attacks. We know that these have been vicious, swift, and very well executed. If a public office like the Homa Bay Speaker's Office can be attacked by unknown assailants and that there's no way of protecting them, then our security systems need to wake up again because we're in trouble. This is a public office. If this is information that is reaching those who would harm this nation, what is to stop them from targeting this level? It's another wake-up call. I wonder if we're paying attention. And that's the very first of the solutions. Number one is that we need to rethink this country. We need to rethink it not from a sort of euphemistic or some kind of theoretical, somebody should do something at some point, this would be very good. No, from the point of view now at an individual level where we have gotten to thus far, just from these headlines alone, tells you that we are at a critical point where we cannot continue to operate like this, not just as state and independent institutions, but as individuals. It's no longer enough that we have intelligence or knowledge. We must inculcate integrity and clarity of vision and execution. If we have got leaders that are in any way running institutions that do not have unqualified accounts and they're in public institutions, do not waste time. Their failure is not in having embezzled, which they may or may not have done. Their failure is in not have kept good accounts. We've got to start at that basic. That if you're not able to deliver the very basic of your job, wherever it is, or your position, you need to move. Number one. Number two is, as citizens today, we have to hold our leadership to account almost like they have hired you to oversee them. Did your MP vote about an increase in pay and in insurance for themselves? Did they also vote for the finance bill? Are they complaining about the high rising debt and individual debt? You need to call back your MP, sit them down, and have a few strong words with a promise that unless they can go back to court, to Parliament, and represent you for exactly what it is that you need as a citizenry, they need to leave that position. This is where it is. The vigilantism that we are seeing, whether it's from the lynching, whether it's from these incredible stories of police officers springing other police officers from other institutions that have the right to arrest. What we're seeing now is the people that have said, we've had enough. We can no longer continue like this. What the hard work is going to be is then taking a proactive stand to stand for this country, for its institutions, and for the sanctity and the continuity of Kenya as a nation. Okay. That's the hard work.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Renee. Now on to the topic of conversation today, and that is restraint in leadership. And I think that has come out in the newspaper stories we've looked at. If you look at the county assembly members behaving badly, should they have shown restraint? When we look at what happened with the DCI officers springing a colleague from EACC custody, should they have exercised restraint? When we look at the story at the IEBC, should Chiloba exercise more restraint? That is the topic of conversation today, and it's been a whole week of similar stories. We had what happened with the Mbira Boys video, which went viral, which a lot of people have been commenting on, that those who say government should have shown restraint by not arresting the boys, that those who argue boys will be boys. There are also those who argue the boys are a reflection of our leaders who have failed to show restraint. Then there was also what happened with the youngest Kenyan MP having been arrested for leading a demonstration over the enforcement of traffic rules. We had the IG saying yesterday that politicians should not interfere or they will be arrested should he have shown restraint. Kenya plans to borrow an additional 92 billion shillings. Should the executive exercise restraint when it comes to borrowing? The topic is restraint in leadership. Send us your thoughts on, as I said, at NTV Kenya, at AM Live KE, at Renee Gamao, and myself at Olive Burrows. The hashtag is AM Live. I will be sharing your thoughts on the subject. But to kick us off is Truforsa, who is a principal at St. Paul's University. She's the principal of the Nairobi campus, a non-executive board member of the International Leadership Foundation Kenya, and a board member of Longhorn Publishers. So Truforsa, you have 5 minutes. Let us know your thoughts on this particular subject.
Thank you. The place of restraint in leadership. I want to start with my grandmother's story. And the story is about why does the hyena have crooked legs? One day there was a feast and all the animals were called to the feast. And the animals started out early. They started their journey and they went, but left behind was the hyena. And he came walking along, waiting for the feast and salivating. And eventually the hyena got to a fork road, and this road divided into two rows like a junction, and he wondered which is the direction to the feast. And so the hyena took the left, and as he went to the left, he thought to himself, I can smell the left, but the right sounds even stronger. And he came back and he started going to the right. And as he went to the right, the smell and the scent and the aroma from the left sounded even better. And he said, which way will I go? And he decided to go both ways. Eventually, his two legs could not go both ways, and that's how he ended up crooked. You see, the story of the hyena reminds us and tells me about the place of restraint. It tells me, because another word for restraint is self-control. And what does self-control actually do? Self-control delineates or puts on you a boundary. It says this far and no more. And in leadership, you have to have boundaries. Why are boundaries important? Boundaries are important because, first, they keep out, when you put a boundary fence, it keeps out the enemy. And it safeguards that which you have. So as a leader, you have to be able to say, because this is what I have been entrusted with, this is my boundary, I have to keep out that which we don't want, that which will bring down my people. I must keep it out by having a boundary. But at the same time, I must safeguard that which we have. And that's what boundaries do. But the other thing that a boundary does is that a boundary is a defense mechanism. It provides a protection for that which you have, and because that which you have is valuable, therefore you must protect it. Therefore, the place of self-control in leadership is to provide a boundary, but also to provide a protection, as well as, and to be able to say, I'm protecting what is inside from the invasion that can come. And from the stories that have come this week, it shows a clear point of lack of restraint. Let's talk about the borrowing. As it has been said in the poem by Yeats, and it was quoted in Things Fall Apart, and I want to end with that.
Turning and turning in the widening guy, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and ever. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack of conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. We need to change this around. We need to push back. We need to go back to a place where we say, what we have is enough. I remember in the days of the President Kibaki, for example, we were able to raise enough for this nation. We need to go back to a place where our leaders can put restraint, where our leaders can put the boundaries and say, even though I'm mad, I will not throw a chair to you. Even though I'm mad, I will not abuse you. Even though I want more for myself, I care more for the people that I'm leading, and I will ensure that first we grow, first we flourish, then I think about myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And within time, Dorcas, you are up next. We had the story of the crooked hyena. I'd never heard that story before.
It's my grandmother's.
Oh, it's your grandmother's tale. Wow. Reminded me of, I don't know, it just brings to mind being by the fireside. And
Tinga, tinga, tinga.
yes, tinga, tinga tales. All right, Dorcas, you ready to go?
Yes.
All right.
Indeed, we are talking about restraint in leadership. And I look at it as a virtue. Actually, it's been said to be one of the greatest virtues in leadership, attributes. Restraint, of course, means many things to many people. It could mean holding back. It could mean hindering. It could mean pulling back. And what are you pulling back from? You are pulling back from an immediate desire to charge at something. You are pulling back from an immediate urge to step into a situation. You're pulling back from a place where, you know, you want to actually show that you are a leader. But when you think about it, you want to hold back, because then when you hold back, there's a shift in your mind that I need to think about this thing before I could charge. When I look at what's happening in Kenya, of course, I'm seeing a lot of lack of restraint, not just in leadership, but in the very fabric of the community and the society around us. When I was reading the papers the other day, and of course it's really trending, what happened in our schools. Case in point here, the Ambira school. I'm looking at boys who were not just very excited that they were done with an exam, but I'm looking at lack of values in our children. And when you talk about leadership, we are talking about the very children that we are bringing up. We are talking about children who do not have values. And the question is, does it start then from our homes? And then it goes all along, you know, into our schools and probably into the universities and into the very institutions that we are calling public institutions. What worries me so much is to see children do these things. Of course, by the time you're seeing it happening at the very top, you know where it has come from. You can trace where the problem has come from. Now, back to values. I think that in our schools, we are lacking what we call as a value system of learning. You know, basically where children are taught values at a very young age. So much so that, you know, at the end of the day, we are growing up a society, we are growing up a people who have been taught what values are right from a very young age. When I see all this rot at the top, I do not want to blame so much the top, because I know it is just a reflection of what is happening from the very family fabric that we have as a nation. Values again. I'm talking about a child who does not know what respect is. I'm talking about a child who has not been taught that there is something called restraint. We are living in a society that is actually just about instant gratification. And we are looking at a society that everything must be done now. And if it's not done my way, I react. And that's basically what we are seeing in our schools. For For the longest time, Kenya has had an issue with schools. From where I sit, a university, we see these children come to us. And sometimes when they're brought to us, by the very parents, expecting us to really turn around a behavior that has been there for so many years, sometimes we do not know where to start from. But many times we just trust that God is going to help us turn these children around, long before they get into leadership positions. Has that been successful? I cannot quite say very much. Because like I said, at the very tender age, when a child is or ought to be learning a couple of things that should take him through life, that's the point at which we have neglected them. And the question is, what do we do with a society that's already broken? What do we do with a society where children do not know what it is to be children? I looked at these boys hurling insults at the leadership of this nation. And my heart cringed. And actually, my heart got so broken. I said, aren't these the same boys at the end of the day we are going to put into power? Because we are going to say, they are boys and they are men, and we're not put them into power. I look at what the MCAs were doing the other day, and I see these boys becoming some MCAs at some point. What are we saying about this nation? What are we saying about the society that we live in? Self-restraint or restraint in leadership is about self-control. It's a choice, actually, to be patient, to choose to be patient, and forbearing in the face of provocation. We get provoked all the time in different places. I look at leaders in parliament. Sometimes I have seen them throwing, items on each other. I have seen MCAs beating up, representatives in their parliaments, in the counties. And what comes to mind is, what is so hard about keeping emotions under control? And that takes me back again to values. How have we been brought up? What are the things that are put in us as we are growing up? Sometimes when I'm walking the streets of Nairobi, I see people fighting. A little provocation, sets people into, exchanging serious blows, and it becomes a real police issue. Then I see our police also, many times hitting at the citizens of the nation very hard at the slightest of provocation. John Maxwell observed that leadership is influence, nothing else, nothing more. What influence do we have on the society as leaders? Well, the other day when I looked at the two policemen who were fighting with the border men, I asked myself, so now who was the leader in that situation? The border man is a leader. Yes, because he's going to carry me in that border, and I trust my life with him. But see how it went. I looked at the policemen running away from this border men, and I said, this nation needs redemption. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dorcas. Renee, you're up next. I mean, just a lot of things have come out of that presentation, the role of the family unit. I'd also like to think about, is there something more? Is it evidence of frayed nerves that we are reacting this way to the slightest provocation? But we'll get into that deeper after Renee's presentation.
Thank you. And thank you to the speakers before. Restraint in and of itself has no value. That's the truth. As human beings, we are predicated towards two things. Number one is the pursuit of pleasure. Number two is the avoidance of pain. The end. What will help us to increase the amount of pleasure that we have, we will pursue to its utmost limit. What will stop us from the pain that we could possibly be inflicted with is what is going to restrain us. That's why we have a constitution. That's why we have all the laws that we do. Because we know that human beings intrinsically, in and of themselves, cannot be trusted to engage in what is known as, quote unquote, enlightened self-realization. That place where because I want to live well, I want to make sure that you live well. If we were that way by nature, we would not be talking about the problems that we're talking about, whether they are economic, financial, social, or otherwise. Allow me to say something and digress a little bit, very, very shortly. I would love to know, just tweet, let us know, how many people did not burn their books at the end of Standard 8, did not burn their books at the end of Form 4, did not burn their school uniforms, did not show the middle finger to their head teacher? How many did not, at the end of university, swear they were never going to touch another book? How different is that from what those boys did, except that that one was captured on camera and was sent round to lots of WhatsApp righteousness groups, that sitting from where they are from the place of comfort, they can now pass judgment on these children. Either it was a theft-free exam or it was not. If it was not, then we cannot say that we have a clean KCPE or KCSE result. That needs to be examined. Anyone can allege anything. We all know that in law, just because someone shows up and says that they shot at, killed, stole, or whatever it was, is not in and of itself proof that that event, number one, happened, or that number two, they were involved in it. But that's a digression. Back to the issue of restraint. I think my colleagues have so well enumerated it that to repeat anything that they have said would really be to water down what have been really perfect interventions. Let me just say a number of things. Restraint, particularly in relation to, and I want to focus on security systems and particularly on the police. What does not come out as often as it should is the number of police officers who on any given day are out there doing their job. We don't get them in the headlines. We don't get the ones who are moving traffic along Wayaki Way, Uhuru Highway, any of the intersections. They don't show up. We don't get the news reports of the OCS and the OCPD that at their station is not just working to ensure that there is security in their area, but is also working to ensure that domestic disputes are taken care of, that boundary disputes are engaged, that their community is having a conversation with all of the other administrative institutions, including the chiefs, etc. And I think this is where this conversation about restraint and leadership becomes a little bit skewed, and especially conversations about the police. Until 2 years ago, we saw something which had never been seen in this country. Police awards. The police awards, we should have actually paid a little bit more attention to them. Here's the reason why. These were public awards. The public would vote in police officers in their area who they themselves said had done so well, had served them so well, including police officers in Huduma centers, police officers at the city mortuary, who had really helped people who were in distress. We never celebrated them, and I would urge, in fact, I would urge every single arm of media, whether it's you here at The Nation and everyone else, radio and print, to follow up and see what happened to those officers who were awarded, because they should be the ones who should be deputy assistant commissioners. They should be the ones who should be OCPDs and OCSs and area chief police commandants, because they showed and lived, as per the public, the very thing that we are seeking to reward. To have a conversation about restraint without having a conversation about integrity and about the values that we need to espouse, not just as theory on Sunday morning when we go to church or on Friday when we are at the mosques, but every single day, and to hold men and women to that level of accountability is useless. Restraint is all about an enlightened selfishness. Why do I say enlightened? Because I know that when my nation is growing, when we do not have 3/4 of the people of Kenya living in under 50,000 shillings and then celebrating the 600,000 shillings one-bedroom house for a family is a score. When we realize the folly of that, then we understand that it is no longer enough for us to ask, beg, or plead for leadership that is visionary, that has integrity, and that is accountable. But we must now demand it, because to not demand it is to be part of the game of robbing ourselves. So restraint is only one of the things that we could talk about. Organizations such as Amnesty International Kenya, for which I am a chair presently, do what? They come in and intervene and highlight those areas where there has not been restraint. But it's not just not been restraint. It is where we have forgotten that human dignity and human right is not something that is given. It is something that is inborn. And that the abrogation of those rights is not something discussable. It must be immediately and effectively quashed. Otherwise, we don't have a nation. And that's the real conversation. Every single, it's easy to look at public institutions and talk about restraint and talk about leadership and talk about the ideal. But what we forget very often is that public institutions are run by professionals for the most part. Let's look at our own professional institutions. What is going on there? It's very difficult for me as a lawyer and an officer of the court to be standing here giving a lecture on restraint when the Judicial Organization Reform Report has just come out 2 weeks ago. Anyone who'd read that would be appalled at the state of the judiciary. What must we do there? It's difficult for me as a lawyer to be here lecturing anyone on restraint in leadership when we all know as a legal body and as a legal fraternity the complaints against lawyers. And here's the thing, I'm only pointing out lawyers because I am one. We could talk about doctors, we could talk about pharmacists, surveyors, any number of professions today. If professionalism is not backed by the wisdom and by integrity and by a vision that is greater than my pocket and my stomach, then we can lecture on this podium, and thank you very much, AM Live, from here until kingdom come, and nothing will change, because the truth of the matter is that the value that is greater today in this country than the integrity and the restraint that we're talking about, or the servant leadership, which is such a fantastic coin phrase right now, the value that we really espouse is the one that we see replayed over and over and over again. And you can see it in the headlines, such as that dirty laundry that is being washed at the IABC, and the tender stories, and what's going on at the ports, and what the complaints are in relation to the police. When we can accept and take responsibility for that is who we are at the present, and we have the power to change that, we can have a conversation about what restraint would actually look like. Let me say this in closing. And this perhaps is a challenge to, I dare not call it my second profession, but to a profession that welcomed me and was very kind. What we focus on, we see more of. What we focus on, we see more of. Let me give you an example, even if I tell you not to focus on it. Do not think about a pink elephant with blue tusks. What just happened? You went to blue elephant and pink tusks and then tried to cancel it, right? For as long as the headlines and the stories that we have in our press and in our media are all about how corrupt, how weak, how bad, how poor, how inept, how unprofessional we are, guess what we will continue to see more of and live? Change the narrative, change the action, you change the nation. We cannot say that all we're doing is reporting. Our words are as powerful in changing that narrative as the actions to change it themselves.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Renee. I mean, all of you, if I was in class, I mean, there would be no need for cheating if all teachers spoke like that, because I would be paying attention, rapt attention at what you have to say. Now, I'll start with the presentation made by True Forcer. Renee, what stood out for you? Was it the yes, True Forces? Was it the story of the crooked hyena that we are grabbing at everything, that we tear ourselves apart?
Actually, it was the fact that you referred to your grandmother. and just to return us to that place where we need to remember who we are and where we came from. And that it hasn't always been like this. That we had societies that did work. What can we take from that past and bring it into this present to create a different kind of future? I love that.
All right. Trifosa, what stood out? Oh, sorry, and as well, also, while we have you, Renee, when you're commenting on the presentations, what did you think of the presentation made by Dorcas? She talked about restraint is basically self-control. She talked about the family unit having a role to play. Did that stand out for you, or what stood out for you?
I think, first of all, I agreed with absolutely everything that you do say. And I think that the conversation and the reason why we always go back to family is because we realize how powerful that unit is in creating a society and in molding a future. Question is, I think that had she had more time to explore, I'd have been interested in, is how do we then return parents to the home by giving them a working, livable wage so that they're not out all day and all night hustling? How do we bring back the children home so that they actually have time to play? How do we recreate that family where those values are being passed from parent to child as opposed to from domestic worker to child, and the parent kind of texts in from time to time hoping that all is well? I think that's definitely something to explore, and I love that you brought that out.
Okay. Trufosa, Doc has also brought out the issue of we live in an age of instant gratification. And, you know, even internationally, if you look at what's happening, you have Donald Trump, for example, who's the US president in Buenos Aires at the moment. He doesn't seem to exercise quite as much restraint in his communication, even on Twitter, you know, and even you have the Italian interior minister making comments about immigrants that in another age would not be tolerated. You have what's happening with the Rohingya Muslims, and you have San, I don't know how to pronounce it right, San Suu Kyi? I need to Google that. But you have her, she's a Nobel Prize winner, being held to account, being told, I mean, how can you just sit there and watch this happen? So is it like a global phenomenon? Is it, and does it have anything to do with the internet age?
You know, as old is, you know, for example, I think there's a saying by Confucius who says, he who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior. So the issue of restraint is an age-old question.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I think I forgot to ask you guys to put your phones on.
That's okay. Sorry. Okay. So the question of restraint is an age-old question. But the reason why all of us are talking about, say, Donald Trump is because we are looking at him as a leader and saying there is something wrong when a leader just keeps blapping out anything they're thinking. That's the reason we are talking about it. It's because in leadership, we expect that somebody would have self-control. They'll be restrained, even though they are under strong emotional impulses to go an opposite direction. But there is a mature, or there is a different thing in them that makes them a leader, that tells them, yes, I feel like doing this, but I will pull back. And I think for me, that is an age-old question. And I think the hardest thing and yet the greatest is that value of being able to have self-control.
Okay.
Yeah.
Renee talked about enlightened selfishness, and she said man basically lives in two states, seeking out pleasure or avoiding pain. So and you said restraint to you is you don't consider it a value. Is that what you said, or?
Restraint is only put in place so that we don't kill one another.
So, okay.
That's all.
Okay.
So that we can live together.
Do you agree with that position?
Isn't that a harsh thing to say?
It is a harsh thing. I think I need to think about it more. But there's something she said. She said it's not a value in and of itself. So, in other words, it becomes important because of the way I would interpret it, as we relate one to another. So if you're alone in your own place, then there's a place to which restraint then may not really apply because you're by yourself. But the fact that you have to live with other people, then restraint becomes key because then it affects our living together. So that then you can come above the selfishness of wanting me, myself, and I to beginning to think, well, yes, me, myself, and I are important, but because I'm with other people, I must restrain my selfishness for there to be a common good of sorts.
Okay. All right. Dorcas, Trufosa talked of boundaries. Is this ultimately an issue of boundaries in and of itself, restraint?
Yes, to a great extent. Remember, when we talk about restraint and boundaries, we are talking about my freedom ends where yours starts. And that in itself is a boundary. That, you know, we need to consider each other. And I'm so glad she brought up the issue of servant leadership. I think that was Renee.
Yeah, Renee.
Yes. I loved it because then what is servant leadership? It is serving the interests of others, knowing that, yes, mine is important, but I choose to put yours before mine. It's about humility. It's about killing this pride thing that drives human beings many times when they do not restrain themselves. It's about being human because we live in a human society. Yes, it's a boundary because it's not always about me, because it's communal. It's not always about what I want, because it's community. It's not about myself and I and everything about this person. It's about what about the people we live together in this society. And of course, when you say that, I want to look at leaders that we have put in place. And what I see a lot is about I, and it's about what's about me. It's about what is it about, how much can I get out of this? More than how much can I give to the people who put me into power. And I think when that narrative changes, that probably that's a time things will begin to work in this nation. Things will begin to work, you know, in every other, you know, sphere around us, you know, in our spaces around. What is it that I can give? I'm sure even as you work for the nation, probably as an employee, it's about what can you give nation more than what am I getting out of nation as an institution, as a company. And those are the boundaries we are talking about. Without boundaries, then, like I said before, we are going to live like animals. Animals have no boundaries. They satisfy themselves anytime, wherever they want, and any time is every time for them. That's not a human being. Okay. We need to think about restraint.
All right. And Renee also spoke about changing the narrative, which
yes.
you also spoke about
yeah.
just now. And she said, when we start telling different stories, then maybe the story will change.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Do you agree?
Again, to a great extent, I do agree, because I think she alluded to that what you focus on so much becomes. That's what everybody sees. And you are in a position to change the narrative, because then when I look at my children sometimes at home, and it's a new concept that's even coming into management, that it's got a strength management focus. That why don't we look so much on your positives and work around them, align everything, every activity around your strengths, not so much on your weaknesses. We can always work on your weaknesses. Why don't we begin to highlight great things about this nation? And they're there. You know, I was just attending the Sustainable Blue Economy the other day. And these outsiders had everything positive to say about Kenya that you only hear when people come to Kenya. What about us within Kenya? Why don't we talk about the good things about Kenya? There are so much. Why would a foreigner come and pick out and say, you have a great nation here. You are a great people. But when I look at you, who's my countryman or countrywoman for that matter, I don't see anything positive. So yes, I think we need to change the narrative, begin to probably highlight a little more of what's positive, what's doing well. I like the awards that were given by to the policemen. Why don't we do that every other place? And we begin to see people begin to light up like, you know, there's something good about us. When I want something good coming out of you, I need to concentrate on your good stuff more than putting you down all the time, because then even the good stuff goes down.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Renee, if I understand you correctly, are you saying the media should restrain itself?
I certainly am. I most certainly am. And now I can do so from the comfort of this end, knowing full well what happens, of course, in the newsrooms.
Yeah.
I think that and this is not a finger out there towards, you know, you media over there, because the truth of the matter is we've both served in a media house together. So there is this end of it, that we must understand that as an institution, like every other institution, we are charged as the media with something which even in African tradition was held in such great value. The storyteller and the fireplace and the passing on of tradition and values through the stories that we told. And so when day after day after day after day we have these kind of stories, then what ends up happening is, number one, the good procurement officers will not work because they don't want their names to end up here. The bad ones will get away with it because they know, come on, Baya, let's just go right the way with it. And so what we effectively do is that we create a self-narrative that is self-destructive. Incidentally, this, many business people as well as potential investors or people who have dealt with investors will tell you this. They will come to Kenya with a very positive story, as you have pointed out. Having read of the great advances that Kenya has made, and we cannot even pretend we are an amazing nation in every sense, and a people who are very hardworking and very educated and very willing to learn. Then they arrive, and it's a mess after a mess after a mess, and before long they're asking themselves, if you guys are saying this about yourselves, what is it that I don't know? Why am I more optimistic than the people who are here? And then we get unfavorable terms for our financing based on our stories about ourselves. We've got to accept as media that we have a power that is greater than reporting. You know, even in the newsroom, that a whole lot of stories will come and then some will be picked and chosen according to various criteria. That criteria has to expand so the whole story is told. Another small example, if I may. 17 stabbings in London. Gangs, young boys, fighting one another, drug-fueled, low income, high rises. Headline, Bloodbath Britain. It's a mess. What are we going to do? The Lord Mayor of London is not doing anything to stop this. These are gang fights. Kenya, 2 weeks, 21 young men shot and killed. Moving on swiftly. Not a single statement. What does that say? What are we saying as media? That 21 Kenyan boys don't matter if they come from the slum, whereas 17 young men from an equitable section of society in the UK are more important? We do have a duty.
Okay.
And we're not, right now, we're not actually performing at par.
All right. I'd like to say that as NTV, we did carry 2 stories on that. I can send you the links. Our reporter Charity Mwangi. No, on TV.
On page.
Prime Bulletin, I think it was story 1, 2, or 3. I'll need to check. I'll send you the link.
It was screaming bloodbath Britain
no,
on
we
the
covered
front
it.
page.
NTV
I know
covered
that
it.
you did cover
yeah.
it, but we need to give the kind of prominence that will make us look at ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I'm not criticizing. This isn't a criticism to sort of say bad, wrong. It's to say, where are we placing the stories that matter about ordinary human beings? Here's another case in point. MPs having awarded their second and their people, second wives, etc., healthcare. Where today, if you go to any public hospital, you will find that there is not enough equipment, or that there are not enough personnel, or that they do not have drugs. And it was okay. Of course it wasn't. We all murmured in WhatsApp, and you carried it. You carried the story.
Yes.
Then what? Then the op-ed needs to follow. Then we know this, Olive. We push the narrative. We know this.
Okay.
What narrative are we pushing?
All right. But then I want to ask this to Forza. Have we then become numb to, she's asking what then, we've had stories after stories after stories of MPs, awarding themselves pay increments and all these other allowances and parks. Have we then become jaded? Because even internationally, if we look at it, there's a lot of the politically incorrect statements that are being made. If we look at what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, the man was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and President Trump comes out and says, we do business with Saudi Arabia, so really I have nothing to say. And it appears to be like a wave. Have we become jaded as a people? Have we become jaded? And I mean globally.
Okay. I think this is an age, again, for me, it goes back to where it is. It is, human beings have always been like that. But within the human race, there's always a people whose conscience is awakened and who say, no, we cannot live like this. Because that's just how it has been. You know, Renee said it, that we love pleasure, we avoid pain, period. So people will always look for things, and therefore the decisions we make is because we're looking for things that would support that, because that's who we are. However, there is always a people who rise up and say, no, we're not going to allow this, because allowing this makes us animals. In other words, it degrades us, and it degrades us from the capacity that we have to think and to make better decisions for ourselves and for the people around us. So whereas globally, it may look like that. It may look like that also because that's more of the narrative and the news that we are able to spread. Remember, we are also in a place where news is instant. As it comes, I'm consuming it. Whereas previously, it wasn't like that. So we were not perhaps aware or well informed, but right now it's instant. So it again goes back to what is it that we are highlighting. For me, what I also think that as a nation, we do not love our nation. We do not love ourselves enough to be able to say no to certain things and yes to certain things. In Kenya now, we believe it's normal. Actually, it is not normal for us to have sitting MPs who are one of the best paid in the nation, and yet we are still in the world, sorry, not in the nation, you're right, in the world, best paid in the world, with the level of economy that we have, adding themselves salaries. And we're adding themselves salaries in a time when we want to borrow more money. And at the same time, our leakage, if you look at the cost of corruption in this nation alone, it is so, in fact, I've been looking at some economics to try and just understand what is this actual cost. We have to look at it more critically. In other words, the amount of corruption we have allowed is the amount of development we have denied ourselves. That's the amount. And yet, we continue to sit. We continue to allow it to go on. There must be an arising in us. There must be an anger in us that says no more. And we begin to bring those who are in political, in every leadership sphere to account, and to begin to demand of them the kind of service and accountability that is required. So what is needed really is a consciousness in us, a love for our nation. You know, when we talk even about selfishness, it is not all of us are selfish, that is true. But we also have to come and appreciate that there is something known as a common good, where we allow ourselves to flourish. And in allowing ourselves to flourish, nobody goes down. It is true, somebody else will always be better than you. But there must be a different consciousness that must be aroused in us. I really hope it happens in my lifetime.
If you don't mind, Trufosa, I love what you just pointed out. This increase in salaries when we're borrowing for development, and when we have just said that the wage bill would be too high if we actually enforce the 2/3 majority. Are we listening to ourselves? And how absolutely schizophrenic we've become about these conversations. How ironic is that?
In fact, let me just, you know, it's like a water tank. A water tank that's leaking, you don't keep putting water in it. That's ridiculous. That's madness. What you do is you repair the leakage before you keep putting water in it. So we cannot borrow. I mean, that's, for me, that's why I'm saying I understand why people borrow and why economies borrow. But in this case, it is ridiculous. And so like what Renee is saying and what we are saying is that we need to start listening to ourselves.
Dorcas, Renee has talked about changing the narrative. Who can we celebrate as Kenyans? Who can we hold up and say, okay, this person demonstrates the self-control we are talking about in terms of they don't respond to every political statement made, but keep to the issues, in terms of, they show restraint in terms of how they spend their time, in terms of the development agenda, in terms of even borrowing. Who can we hold up and say, okay, this is exemplary?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think in all our spaces, we have people. We have people we can look up to and say, you know what, this is happening. Of course, if you really would want me to point out a figure, I would always talk about my governor, and that's Professor Kivutha Kibwana. That's my governor. He's a leader to emulate in every way. I see humility in that man. I see focus in that man. I see him, you know, show a lot of self-restraint. Of course, you remember the story, his story just when he became a governor. And when he should have been throwing mud at everybody, he would look at them and he gave it time. And of course, indeed, time healed the situation that was happening around him. But then, coming back to all of us, we need to look around who we can celebrate in our spheres. There are people who are given to the cause for which they go out there for every morning. We see them every time. Small people, like, we talked about the policemen. We talked about, a while back I saw a matatu tout who helped out a woman, actually gave birth in a matatu. Every passenger ran away. But this man stood with this woman and helped her out. And she actually gave birth in the matatu. I mean, where are those people? Those are the people we need to, bring out and tell this community and the society at large. This is a given man, a man given out to not what's in it for me before I can do what? I can engage. But it is about what can I give? How can I make my life, the life of the people around me better than what it is already? There are so many of such people. It's just, you just need to look and not look too far and you will see them.
And it's true. Renee talks about selfishness, but also I think helping other people is, if you want to look at it from a selfish point of view, if you lift other people up, we all rise. Yeah. Okay, Trufosa, who has, because it's a discipline issue, this restraint issue is a self-control issue, is a discipline issue. Which Kenyan leader strikes you as disciplined? Okay. And it doesn't have to be a political one, but it could even be in a different sphere.
Yeah. Excuse me. I have several. I have many that I would talk about. But the one that stands out, when we were just talking about the MP salaries, I think about Sarah Serem. She stood and she said, it is not good for this nation. Now, I'm imagining that from where she was sitting, the kind of pressure that she went through to increase salaries. And even when she went through the evaluation process to say, no, we need to rationalize, we need to think through every job group. I was just sitting here and thinking, those are the kind of people we need to celebrate. Someone who's able to say no to every political pressure. But there are many people, again, and I totally agree, who are able to say, no, we're going to run this right. I'm thinking about my own Vice Chancellor, Professor Galgalo. He says, no, we're going to run this right. Our tenders are going to be above board. Everything, recruitment is going to be above board. So there are very many people, and definitely in every sphere. I'm thinking about teachers who teach our children. And I think about one teacher who taught my son, for example. And she went out of her way and said, you know what? I'm going to help your son over lunchtime. After lunch, he'll play a little and I'll be taking about 15 minutes to just spend some time with him. That particular teacher has always remained very special to me. Why? She went out of her way. She didn't need to. But she said, I want to help him. And there are many Kenyans like those.
Okay. Renee, what about for you?
I love that. I love what Dorcas and Trish have said, because it points out that heroes and leadership isn't somewhere up there with 500,000 Twitter followers or 1 million or 3 million votes. It's every day. It's everyday people doing what it is that they do from where they are, with a sense of compassion, with integrity, and with values. Who stands out for me? I'm the chair of Amnesty International Kenya. Wow. Shall I start with the entire staff? Capital FM carried the story of the award by to Nancy Baraza, who is one of our human rights defenders at Amnesty International Kenya. And I'm quite sure that Nation is going to have her on and interview her for this. She got an award in the UK very recently for the work that she's done, but under incredible circumstances. A woman who has been arrested even when pregnant, just for standing up for rights of people in very desperate situations in the slums. Right the way to Peter Uko, who fights for rights for prisoners. Another group of people who we would write off and forget that actually behind the crime, behind the sin is a sinner, a human being. Behind the crime is a human being who is capable of reform. To my own CEO, Irongo Houghton. But stepping away from the human rights field. And this is by no means not, you know, the shout out continuum, WICS and the Dandora Youth and the Mathare Youth Social Club. There's a whole list of those, right the way even to residents' estates associations. I love what we saw at Langata when the residents said no more nicking our water and then closing out our water and then bringing us Bowsers. We want what we asked for and what we pay for every day. I think that's a true act of people standing up for what is their right and dignity. But let me take a step back from that and say this, that whether it's in professions, and I'll go back to my profession, but not just my profession, whether it's at the Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentistry Union, or whether it's at the surveyors, at whatever level, professionals today, we must make a covenant amongst ourselves that not only will we have leadership that is competent in terms of that they are able to deliver, but leadership of integrity and leadership of value, and that we will hold one another within those professional institutions. To see that if, for example, we're talking about law, that justice is not just done, but that it is seen to be done and equally dispensed to all. What a difference that would make in this nation if we just took that on. But at every single level, integrity, proven record, values, and a vision, and holding to account.
All right.
Then we have a lot of people celebrating. We could be celebrating in the future as well.
So that winds up our conversation on that particular subject. Victoria's World AIDS Day is the 30th anniversary of that particular day. I'd like to get a sense from the three of you what it means to you. I'll start with you, Dorcas. What is the day? Is it just another day, or is it just another day? Almost every day has some sort of significance. But does World AIDS Day hold any special significance to you?
Yes, it does. We need a scourge that has hit the whole world. And I'm looking at it from the Kenyan space perspective. And it should be a day. We just don't celebrate in a media house like this, in a media house like this, and it's happening. What are we doing? What are we doing with people who already are going through this? Both they are affected, and they're all affected, and they're around us in our societies. I wish it would be more of a day of empathy and reaching out to them. We have children who have been left as in our society. It should be a day that a child can one day look back and say, on an AIDS day, identified me somewhere and took care of me and took me to school. It should be a day that we should celebrate, knowing that it is going to mark